Magic and Mystery in Tibet by Alexandra David-Neel. Chapter 4, Dealing with Ghosts and Demons. And this is the last part of Chapter 4 that I'm going to read. And just before I do that, I'd like to just say that I'm looking ahead now to the upcoming chapters, and they sound so interesting. Chapter 6 is entitled Psychic Sports. Chapter 7 is entitled Mystic Theories in Spiritual Training. And Chapter 8, and this is the last chapter, is entitled Psychic Phenomena in Tibet, How Tibetans Explain Them. So I hope you'll stay with me for those. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe and please like my videos or audios as we go along, because it really helps me as, yes, I'm trying to build this channel, right? So here we go. This is the last part of Chapter 4. This language was clear enough to me. Someone, no doubt one of the Lama's disciples, had gone to the place and performed chod near the corpse. The configuration of the land allowed me to reach unnoticed a small hillock and to hide myself in a cleft sheltered from the moonlight. From there I could perfectly observe the celebrant of chod. He was the lean, sickly-looking Trapa to whom I had offered medicine. He wore his usual ragged Naljorpa dress, a garnet-colored pleated shirt, a yellow chemise, and with wide sleeves, and a red sleeveless waistcoat of a Chinese shape. But now the monastic toga was thrown over it, and though as shabby as the rest of his clothes, its folds imparted a dignified and impressive mien to the small, emaciated monk. When I arrived, the young ascetic recited the mantra of praise to the Prajnaparamita. Quote, O wisdom that is gone, gone, gone to the beyond, and beyond the beyond. Svaha. End quote. So that last word, I'm going to spell it for you. S-V-A with a circumflex, H-A with a circumflex. The monotonous dong-dong of the deep-voiced drum became slower and finally ceased. The young ascetic seemed sunk in meditation. After a while, he wrapped himself more tightly in his Zen. The kankling in his left hand and the damaru lifted high in the right and beating an aggressive staccato, the man stood in a challenging attitude as if defying some invisible enemy. I, the fearless Najalpa, he exclaimed, I trample down the self, the gods, and the demons. His voice sounded still louder. Yea, lamas, spiritual teachers, heroes, kadamas, by thousands, come, join me in the dance. Then he began the ritualistic dance, turning successively toward the four quarters, reciting, I trample down the demon of pride, the demon of anger, the demon of lust, the demon of stupidity. Each exclamation, I trample down, was accompanied by actual stamping and ritual vociferations of tseng, shez, tseng, which grew louder and louder till the last ones were thundered out in a truly deafening tone. He rearranged his toga, which trailed on the ground, and having put aside his damaru and the bone trumpet, he spread the tent, seized a peg in one hand, a stone in the other one, and drove home the pegs while chanting the liturgy. The tent stood there now, a puny thing, made of thin white cotton fabric that had once been white and appeared grayish now under the moonlight. It was ornamented with the words Om, A-U-M, Ah, hum, H-U-M, cut out in blue and red material and sewn on its 3 closed sides. Several frills of the 5 mystic colors, red, blue, green, yellow, and white, hung from the little roof, and the whole thing was faded and shabby. Apparently agitated by disturbing thoughts, the lean ascetic looked at the pieces of the corpse scattered on the ground and then turned his head as if inspecting the surroundings. He seemed hesitating, and heaving a deep sigh, he passed his hand twice or thrice over his forehead. Then, shaking himself as if summoning up his courage, he seized the kangling, blew loudly a number of times, first slowly, then accelerating the rhythm, as for an exasperated summons, and entered his tent. The nocturnal landscape that had been animated by the performance recovered its serenity. What was I to do? The Naljarpa, I knew, could not leave his tent before daybreak. Nothing more was to be seen. I was not in a meditative mood. I might as well go away. But there was no hurry. I continued to listen. At intervals, I heard a few words of the ritual, and then low, indistinct muttering and moaning. It was useless to remain there any longer. I moved cautiously out of my hiding place, and then, as I took a few steps forward, I heard a low growl. An animal quickly passed in front of me. It was a wolf. The noise made by the Naljarpa had kept it away, and now, since all was silent, it had ventured to approach the feast laid there for those of its kind. As I began to round the hillock and climb down, a sudden exclamation stopped me. "I pay my debts," shouted the Naljarpa. "As I have been feeding on you, so feed upon me in your turn. Come, ye hungry ones, and you that ungratified desires torment. In this banquet offered by my compassion, my flesh will transform itself into the very object of your craving. Here I give you fertile fields, green forests, flowery gardens, both white and red food, clothes, healing, medicines. Eat, eat." The excited ascetic blew furiously as Kangling uttered an awful cry and jumped to his feet so hastily that his head knocked against the low roof of the tent, and the ladder fell in on him. He struggled a while under the cloth, emerged with the grim, distorted face of a madman, howling convulsively with gestures betokening intense physical pain. Now I could understand what chod means for those who work themselves up until they are absolutely hypnotized by its ritual. No doubt that the man felt the teeth of some invisible ghouls in his body. He looked around him in all directions and addressed unseen bystanders as if he had been surrounded by a host of beings from other worlds. Most likely, he beheld some kind of a ghastly vision. The sight was deeply interesting, but I could not look at it with complete indifference. This poor fellow would kill himself with this dreadful ritual. I had discovered the secret of his sickly appearance and why he had deemed my medicines of no avail. In his case, I felt most anxious to awaken him from this nightmare. Yet I hesitated because I knew that my intervention would go against the established rule. Those who have engaged in such training must fight it out unaided. I remained undecided. I heard the wolf growling again. It had stopped on top of the hillock. From there, as if petrified and in an attitude of intense terror, the animal looked fiercely in the direction of the tumble-down tent, as if it too held some appalling sight. The Naljarpa continued to moan in agony. I could not bear it any longer. I rushed toward the poor mad fellow, but as soon as he caught sight of me, he called to me with a vehement gesture, shouting, "Come, angry one, feed on my flesh, drink my blood." This was too absurd indeed. He took me for a ghost. In spite of the pity which I felt, I nearly laughed. "Do be quiet," I said. "There are no demons here. I'm the Reverend Lady Lama, whom you know." He did not appear even to hear my voice, but continued to address me in the words of the ritual. I thought that the toga in which I was wrapped gave me perhaps a somewhat ghost-like aspect, so throwing it on the ground, I spoke again. "Now, do you recognize me?" It was of no use. The poor novice was utterly out of his mind. He outstretched his arms toward my innocent Zen and addressed it as if it were a new corner among the troop of phantoms. Why had I not let him alone and gone away without interfering with his performance? I had only made things worse. As I pondered over the matter, the young man, who was staggering around his tent, stumbled on one of the pegs and fell heavily to the ground. He remained immobile, as if he had fainted, and I watched him to see if he would get up, but I did not dare to approach, for fear I would frighten him even more. After a while he moved, and I deemed it better to withdraw before he looked at me again. I decided to inform the Lama of what was happening to his disciple, though I guessed that the latter often went into such a state while performing chod, and probably his teacher did not ignore it. Still, he might be particularly mad tonight. Rob Joms could send the other Trappa to fetch him and spare the poor young man several hours of suffering. As I had failed in my attempt to help him directly, I did not see any better way. I went down to the thong. All the way I continued to hear at intervals the sound of the cankling, to which the howling of the wolf sometimes made an answer. Then the noise gradually decreased until I heard it no more, and I plunged with delight into the great, silent peace of the desert. The feeble light of a small altar lamp, a tiny star on the slope of the hill, indicated the Lama's dwelling place. I avoided the tent where the attendant was likely to be asleep and climbed up quickly to the cave. Rabjam's Gyatso was seated cross-legged in meditation. Without moving, he only lifted his eyes when I opened the curtain and addressed him. In a few words, I told him in what condition I had left his disciple. He smiled faintly. "You appear to know Chad, Jetsunma. Do you really?" he inquired calmly. "Yes," I said, "I have practiced it too." He did not reply. After a while, the Lama remained silent and seemed to have forgotten my presence. Yet I tried again to appeal to his pity. "Rinpoche," I said, "I warn you seriously. I have some medical knowledge. Your disciple may gravely injure his health and be driven to madness by the terror of his experiences." He really appeared to feel himself being eaten alive. "No doubt he is," answered the Lama with the same calm, "but he does not understand that he is himself the eater. Maybe that he will learn later on." I was about to reply, arguing that the poor novice might, before the time came, give other candidates for secret lore the opportunity of performing chod before his own corpse. Perhaps the Lama guessed what I was about to say, for, without allowing me time to utter a word, he added, slightly raising his voice, "You seem to imply that you have had some kind of training in the short path in quotes. Did your spiritual teacher not inform you of the risks, and did you not agree that you were ready to run these three, illness, madness, and death? It is hard to free oneself from delusion," he continued, "to blot out the mirage of the imaginary world, to liberate one's mind from fanciful beliefs. Enlightenment is a precious gem and must be bought at a high price. Methods to teach Tharpa are many. You may follow another one, less coarse than that suited to the man that you pity, but I am certain that your way must be as hard as that of my disciple. If it is easy, it is a wrong one. Now pray, go back to your camp. You may come to see me tomorrow in the afternoon if you wish to." It was useless to add another word. The ideas expressed by the Lama are current among Tibetan mystics. I bowed my parting good night and returned to my tent. The next afternoon I availed myself of the permission which Rabjam's Gyatso had given me to pay him a visit, and during the few days that I still spent at that place, I saw him again several times. He was not a great scholar, but he had a deep insight into a number of subjects, and I was glad to have met him. Inborn tendencies to distrust and incredulity prevent me from granting full faith to the many dreadful stories told by Tibetans regarding the practice of chod. I persist in believing that such a dramatic performance as that which I have chanced to witness, is exceptional. Yet the feeling of being devoured during the celebration of this rite and wasting away of the novices are not very rare occurrences. I have personally known 2 or 3 cases of the kind beside the related above, and like Rabjam's Gyatso, the masters of these unfortunate candidate Naljorpas also declined to reassure their disciples by disclosing to them the subjective nature of their sensations. Moreover, I have already mentioned a number of mystic masters hold that these sensations are not, in fact, always entirely subjective. The liturgic text of Chod and its scenic part are said to be the work of a certain Lama, Padma Rigdzin, head of the Dzogchen sect, who lived about 200 years ago. And let me spell this for you. Padma-Rigdzin, and the sect is Dzogchen. In 1922, I paid a visit to his successor, or rather, according to the Tibetan belief, to himself, who, having several times died and been reborn, still occupied the seat of the abbot of the Jangsen Gompa. The wild aspect of the site where the monastery stands at the border of the immense northern grassy solitudes is well fitted to incline the mind to fantastic, dismal broodings. Yet the good Padma Rigdzin, who was my host, did not in the least appear to indulge in melancholy musing. Mercantile schemes, together with childish whims, occupied his mind. He questioned me at length on French, Indochina, and Burma, inquiring about import and export in these countries. He especially wanted to know if he could get peacocks from there, as he had a great desire to add some of these birds to his zoological collection of live animals. However, far away from the sumptuous apartments of the Lama Tulka, isolated, small dwellings, sheltered monks, whose grave look and mysterious demeanor matched the surrounding scenery more harmoniously. Some of these Changkongs were inhabited by strict recluses who had intercourse with nobody. Among them, some aimed at obtaining supernormal psychic faculties or magical powers, while others were absorbed in mystic contemplations, which, according to views held in their sect, should lead them to spiritual enlightenment. For long, the monastery of Dzogchen had been famous as a center where secret methods of psychic training are taught and practiced. Those who have attained the fruit of Chod may dispense with the theatrical side of the rite. Its different phases are then called to mind only in the course of silent meditation, and soon even this exercise becomes unnecessary. Nevertheless, either because they enjoy remembering through that performance the exertions of their novitiate days, or for some other reasons known only to themselves, certain Gomchens sometimes meet to celebrate Chod together. But then the dismal rite changes its character and becomes a mystic feast in which the exulting Naljorpas rejoice over their utter freedom. I've had the rare opportunity of beholding some of these ascetics, tall men of Kham, Kham, clad in the picturesque garb of the hermits, their plaited hair falling to their feet. Under the starry sky, they danced to the strange music of hand drums and femur trumpets in these majestic wilds which lay at the summit of our globe. On their ecstatic faces shone the proud joy of having trampled down the feelings that keep the mind feverish through hopes and fears and through the burning thirst, the distressing race towards mirages. And then they sank in endless meditations that kept them till late after dawn, sitting cross-legged, the body erect, the gaze cast down, motionless like stone images. It was a sight never to be forgotten.